We're back.
We're back.
We're back.
You got a background now.
I do. Every week you get better, although
We got to get you on the lighting.
the light from
Lighting game.
heaven is coming down to me.
Right on the wind turbine, right on clean energy.
Watch this. Watch this. Hold on. Let's see if it works. There we go.
Yeah. See, I think the next step is to get you a light for the video that when you turn on the wind turbine, it powers.
Oh, the light. Yeah.
Just get Mav,
I have a lot of some. This office is facing our street, and there'll be a lot of times people will stop. I'll be working here, and they'll just be like staring in, looking at that thing, wondering what it is.
How big is it for people who can't? I mean, it's hard for me just being on video, but roughly, what's the scale?
So it's like three and a half feet.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. It's pretty good.
Did you build that with your boys?
Sure did.
Nice.
Yeah, they are Mav with the elder. Just took a full Saturday. It was the best parenting babysitting a parent can buy. So,
Have you is Max into like mega blocks at this point? Is he
Max
there?
is into destroying everything. Anything we're trying to build, it doesn't matter. He's just trying to destroy it.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about Ian?
Likes mega blocks.
Yeah.
Magnetiles.
Oh, Magtop's great.
And we're we're now in like baby shark phase, and he can sing, so he just rolls around the house. Yeah. Which is, I mean, it's cute. Like it's fun, but yeah, that's what he's doing now. He's singing. So, and he's starting to get independent. This like about this age, like he wants to do everything. So he'll scream his name at you when like, like if you're like doing something that he wants to do, he's like, Ian. So here you go.
Add me to the equation.
Yeah, so that's fine. But anyways, so we spent some time writing a blog post that wrote off of something you wrote. You want to walk our audience into that?
Yeah. So a week and a half ago, I published with help from Ty Finley an article about the industrial tech M&A over the last few years, last decade or so, and good interest from the community. Some people claiming the database was too small, which we agreed with ultimately, but it elevated the question to what are the best technology exits for the energy transition of the past decade or so, and using similar parameters, public information has to be there. Both from the early rounds all the way to the exit. Kevin and I here put together a list of about, was it 20 names, Kevin?
21, I think. Yeah, I was right.
21. And the numbers are interesting. There'll be a similar criticism around it's a small data set, but again, that's part of the story. And some lessons learned from it.
So kicking off, what surprised you about that data set? I mean, nothing surprised you because you've been around space. You saw the exits, but anything that immediately jumped out?
Yeah, so there is in energy transition, there's one more nuance to the data set versus industrial tech. Industrial tech, you're pretty much always selling B2B. In the energy transition, there's both a hardware software segmentation. But there's also whether it's B2B or B2C, and the delta between B2B, so business to business, and business to consumer businesses was pretty stark in terms of capital raised, exit profiles, and I guess the surprise to me would have been that where they were different in terms of exit size and capital needs.
Yeah. So something the numbers don't show, and we didn't actually talk about this in the article that I think we should discuss. If the graveyard could speak, which one has more?
Okay. There are far more companies, this is just a bold statement, that have tried to be consumer-focused energy companies.
Yep.
Because everybody thinks it's really easy on the outside. Just change consumer behavior, make this, knick-knack, or try to, gamify this. Very few are successful. there are a ton of B2B ones. And the reason those aren't dead yet is because the people who go into that space are truly diehard. I see so many businesses, and they're good businesses, 2 to 5 million of revenue, not growing quickly because the space won't let them, but they just won't die. And because the people that do it love it far more than the people that try the consumer side, is what I felt.
Yeah, that's a good point. Something that came up today in a meeting that we had that I thought was interesting, and we did this a little bit at Choose. I remember our early pitch decks. So when we were,
hold on, I'm going to pause you there. Yep. I feel like we're going to be talking about Choose a fair amount today. Probably the time to stop and let's just talk about what Choose is in the history of Choose.
Yeah. So I'm not the one to speak on this. This has to be you. I mean, Choose Energy was the Expedia of energy choice. Right. That's the easiest way to explain it.
Correct. And your role there was?
So I ran product there at Choose. So me and Jonathan, my business partner, handled most of the day-to-day around interfacing with the actual retail suppliers themselves. So if you're not familiar, 50 to 70% of the country has a choice on who they pick as their provider. So in Texas, that may be TXU, that may be Constellation, some of the bigger guys, NRG, Reliant. You've seen their stadium down in Houston. They put their name on a lot of stuff because customer education in retail energy is expensive. And so we built Choose as a marketplace to help people make decisions in that industry. That industry is still super shady. It's still not transparent at all. And the goal was to help consumers make a choice that they could feel comfortable in.
That's right.
Right?
Yep. And the company was founded in Dallas by a guy named Jerry Dias, ultimately split offices between San Francisco and Dallas to combine tech and energy, a thesis that we now both invest in. And ultimately raised about $25 million of total capital between 2012 and an exit in, what year was it? 2017?
Middle of 2017.
Middle of 2017. To Red Ventures. So, a good example of a company that the right idea, if you think about a technology marketplace, seems ripe for disruption, and yet was a pretty, we learned a lot, but isn't going to be on the $1 billion exit list. What if you had to give a support to our potential audience out there about the 3 things you learned from Choose? What would you share?
That's a good question. The first one is great businesses have a lever they can pull, and it works every time. We tried this. We tried to create a playbook, great playbooks. Ultimately, we figured some things out, but some of the variables within those playbooks, one of them being weather, driving energy bills, was out of our control. Mm-hmm. That would be number 1. Number 2, I wrote a little bit about is that not all CAC is created equal. And not all markets are created equal in terms of adoption. And number 3 is perceived value to a consumer. In the energy world, and this will be, our audience is obviously starting out very energy heavy. So they understand that switching energy providers won't turn your lights off. Most of the country doesn't get that.
Yeah.
And it's not worth, and so you always have to think about this when you're delivering something, whether it's B2B or B2C, right? The perceived value to your customer is the value that you have to deliver first, if that makes sense. If they're going to spend money on your product or risk something on your product, the perceived value has to be really high. And I just don't, that's the hard part with retail energy in my mind. It's a commodity, right?
Right.
But it's a valuable commodity.
Let's see.
What are yours?
Pretty similar. There's a line in the Kleiner Perkins office that says something along the lines of, I should look this up, but the best of breed doesn't grow on thinly sliced salami. And I think a lot of people think about it as, you shouldn't starve a team. But in our space, it just meant there wasn't enough profit in the industry that we could take to really grow the technology side of the business. So, even if the energy bill is $100, profit to the energy provider itself is probably $6 or $7, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, what are you as the marketplace going to take all of that? No, you can't. The rake too far by Bill Gurley says you can probably take maximum 30%. And so you're making $2 a month on a customer profit. Yep. So it's really hard to grow a big business with those economics. It's probably my overall lesson.
A lot of what Gurley talks about just didn't apply to Chews. Like he talks about monogamy, serial monogamy in a marketplace. You retail energy, because the contracts are 12 plus months, you have to buy your customer every time.
Yeah.
Frequency of transaction to that point is low. And so again, going back to the value you deliver, the value you deliver has to be larger the more infrequent somebody interacts with you.
Good point.
And when the value is low and they interact infrequently, that's a tough spot to create a flywheel.
That's a really good point. It's a great line.
We have thought about this a lot.
Yeah.
And the conversation today, now that we've kind of clarified where we're going, the examples we used in pitching Chews were travel, the healthcare industry, things where choice had started. This is 4 years after Obamacare, right? So it's like, this is when choice had started to unlock in healthcare. And now the comparison is being made with like Redfin and homes being bought online, or people interacting more with NerdWallet and fintech. And I still don't think those are analogous. But I see the trap.
All those other events, you said, infrequent purchase of a house. Made a lot more meat in the bone to build a business.
Right.
When you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, or in consumer credit cards, I mean, the profit industry, if you run it well, is far higher than energy.
Right. And it's a good point where it's like the home buying thing that even, again, most parts of the country have a provider of last resort. So it's not like Texas. It's not Texas. You have to pick a retail provider, but everywhere else you really don't. So like, even if you're on a Zillow, in which we tried Zillow, and you're on a Redfin, we talked to Trulia, those kinds of things, people still don't have to switch. They don't have to use your product. So it's not you're not checking something off the box for them. And it's just really, really hard.
Default is to do nothing. That's
yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so ultimately you spend a lot of time because you think as a product person, you're like, well, if I integrate more fully, if it's not a jarring experience, maybe, and we tried this with newspapers, it's like if they don't have to leave the site. So you ultimately end up spending a lot of resources. And really what people want is they just want to switch easily, which means you have to have a good marketplace and a good platform, which means you have to buy the customer.
So good summary of maybe some of the pros and cons, a lot more cons. And we're revealing, but it's 5 years into or 4.5 years into a post Series A, which actually is very consistent with the stats we have here for energy tech. And Chews gets their first inbound inquiry for acquisition. I think one of the M&A surprises for me is a lot of the corporates have been trained to know that there's probably two paths for venture-backed companies and how they exit. Those are going to go big at all costs. And then there's like a second range for, call it $75 to $250 million, where corporates know that like, there's a sweet spot where venture is looking to exit if it's not a huge company. Mm-hmm. And so once people get a whisper for your revenue number or your metrics and you're anywhere in that range, somebody will come poking if there's a more innovative player in the field. And that is what happened, obviously, with us.
I love that point you just made. I've never actually thought about that, is that iBankers are trained to know when we want to get out.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes tons of sense, but I just never.
Yeah. 4 to 5 years. I mean, think about a venture capital fund like 10-year fund, supposed to invest over 5 years, harvest over 5 years. So unless you're the very first deal in a fund, let's say you're midway through a fund and you're in year 3 of investing. Well, 4 years after that, you're in year 7 and you have to be harvesting. So, there's bankers, whether they admit it or not, are crawling through venture portfolios to see what companies fit that bill.
Mm-hmm. That's smart. Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about too, because I think in this space, and we saw this in our data, the acquirer matters, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what we found in the data is, well, there are actually a few IPOs, a few more than even in the industrial tech space, and the reason for that is the market of consumers for energy is larger than the market for industrial technology, in that there are technically 300 million individuals in the US who could be engaging in an energy discussion. There's not 300 million industrial technology firms. So the unit for customer acquisition is smaller, and therefore if something works well, it can scale really quickly. And we saw that in the data as well. And then, version 2 to that, in terms of type of acquirer, is there is and you referenced this a little bit earlier, but energy is part of a broader discussion now. Mm-hmm. So whether you want to believe that Nest is an energy company or not, it's just part of the home services bundle. And Opower, is that an energy company or not? I mean, it was a behavioral analytics company to reduce your energy bill. Energy doesn't have to mean you're actually transacting in kilowatts to be an energy transition company. And when you frame it that way, different types of acquirers start showing up.
Yeah, that's there's a lot there. Where is Nest an energy company? I mean, Nest was only in what was it, like 1 million homes when Google bought them for $3 billion. Right? Yeah, I think it's like 1 million. It was a fairly small. I think it was a very small number.
I mean, so just to be clear, though, you say just 1 million or something anywhere near that. Very few products in the history of the planet that aren't requirements, right? That's like a water heater,
right?
Reach 1 million homes that have anything to do with energy. Nobody cares.
Yeah, it's one at this point, right? And it's
right. And so, to me, that is it's the outlier that proves the rule that you have to, if you're going to truly be transacting in energy on a profitable level, the sale isn't energy. Nest wasn't a sale about energy. The sale of a connected home, but a more digital experience about controlling it from your phone.
Sold at the right time of the hype cycle. I would argue that connected home is not as much of a thing anymore. But it was right around. I mean, I think we want it to be, but do you think it is?
Do you want the connected home? Remember all the commercials, your home talking to you, preparing your light on. It's very in your face. It's clear now that the connected home is something that falls into the background.
Sounds like energy.
Yeah.
I mean, my favorite part of my connected home is my Google Net Wi-Fi, the mesh Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but it's also that's in the background. That's just and I didn't pick it up until my Wi-Fi didn't work well. So I don't think I picked it up because it was a connected home cell, which kind of goes to your point a little bit there.
Right. I also, maybe you should touch on this, Kevin, which is in our data set, there is a few years where all of these companies were founded, and then something happened. So why don't you just talk about the history of the data set?
Yeah. So one of the things we noticed in the data set was that exits tend to occur up until about 2017, which makes intuitive sense when you think that Clean Tech 1.0 really started getting funded from John, 05 to 09 ish. The data we use when we're talking about Intellis is that from 07 to 2012, almost $20 billion a year was going into clean tech. And from 2013 till 2019, that number was closer to 3 billion annually. So then it reasons to make sense that the companies that got the first round of investment and survived exited between now and 2017, and then funding dried up for roughly 3 or 4 years, and so nothing, and acquisitions have happened for this 3 or 4 years. But as that curve has started to accelerate with funds like yours and ours, I suspect, moving forward, 2022, 2023, and onward, we'll start to see an uptake in exits again.
Right.
But it's what was happening at the bottom of the cap table that prevented the exits for the last few years.
Yeah. I think, we're seeing with ChargePoint being whispered to be going in the SPAC, maybe Proterra, a few others that are, behind the scenes getting developed. The SPAC event may be bringing that cycle forward by a year or two for some of these more energy-ish companies. But yeah, so if you assume that funding began really in 2018, 2019 again, that wave, assuming it's another 4 to 5 year cycle before exits happen, bankers can be pretty busy in 2023.
And if you look at some of the, especially in the consumer side, and you mentioned Proterra and ChargePoint and some of the companies, Sunrun, that started later, they were hardware companies. It was hard tech. So it makes sense that some of them took 10 years to exit. I think the time to exit, and I've seen people write on energy can't be done in a traditional fund structure. And I think that might have been true in Clean Tech 1.0 because you had to develop technologies much like healthcare technologies that take 10, 15 years to develop. But I don't think that's the case anymore. I think now that the infrastructure and the hardware has been laid, that we're looking at more traditional 7 to 10 year exits moving forward.
That would imply that the businesses get more capital efficient, which is what you're saying.
Yep.
I only hope so.
Well, I also think you're going to see, in addition to, and I'm hoping that we'll see more people. It won't be utilities unless some regulations happen, but oil and gas has to pivot. Some of these software companies like the Oracles, the Ciscos, the Microsofts of the world getting into at least on the fringes of what energy is. I think you're also going to see a more healthy acquisition market, which will move those timeframes forward as well. Whereas like before, there weren't many, and we kind of experienced this at Choose, and we had to find a buyer a little bit. We had to, find who it was, how we fit. I think that becomes less of a problem moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Every sales process is different. And a banker will always say it's better to be bought than to be sold. And Choose, as I talked about earlier, began as trying to be bought. Ultimately, that acquire fell away, and it turned into more of a sell process just because everybody had a taste for what a big dollar sign looked like. That's also a great reference point here is if there's an M&A process that's going to happen and it leaks at all to your employee base, you got to go through with it. People, once they hear a number, they can do the calculation to figure out what their shares are worth. They've already bought the house in their mind.
Right.
Fact. And so, any tip of advice on personnel management is you have to keep it to like 3 or 4 people max when there's an M&A discussion happening. At Choose, it was you, me, and Jerry, and one other person. And I think that's really important. And so because when a process turns into a sell process and there's actually multiple bidders engaged and bankers being discussed, it's going to take longer than you think.
Mm-hmm.
B, there's going to be a roller coaster of emotions that people showing up and being interested and falling away. And then, I see, and probably most importantly is you got to keep killing it at your business. You got to keep performing while this whole thing's happening. And which means you compartmentalize your life. And just, that's not easy.
So I want to touch on this, and we can edit this out, but it could be interesting. So we may keep it. Let's talk about it. That last part you mentioned, not energy related, extremely, extremely hard. So several of the people in the Dallas office, either I had a hand in recruiting or had become really close friends of mine. And knowing the acquisition and knowing that our acquisition was mostly going to be moved to Charlotte or don't, and knowing that the people who were here, like they didn't want to leave Dallas. Dallas was home. Having friends that are going to lose their job, but you have people like Jerry who you're rooting for to win is really emotionally tough. And I don't think that's something that investors, that founders talk about enough, is that when you have an exit that results in some amount of people not moving on with the new company and you get independently wealthy, that's not as celebratory as people think it is. I just think that's the human part of it that no one talks about.
Yeah. Yeah. It sucked. There's a human part of an exit. Most exits are acquired in our space or the broader energy technology space. For a big portion of the valuation is ascribed to IP, right? Which is a technology you've developed. And the thing is that once it's developed, a big acquirer will want a subset of the technical staff. But in many cases, what they're doing is they're going to staple your IP into their larger organization and sell the hell out of it.
That's right. The acquisitions that retain value are the ones where you can cut costs.
Right, where they cut costs and then they insert the technology into their distribution channel.
That's right.
And it can seem heartless, but again, we need more of these in the system.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it's. I'm happy and thrilled with what we accomplished at Choose, and feel like it was. I mean, everyone I know that I'm still really good friends with. I'm in business with Jonathan, and I'm still really good friends with Barry and the rest. But that's something that people just don't. And for a good reason, right? Like you don't really like somebody gets independently wealthy. There's no woe is me, like none of that, right? But like they're people too, and it's like that's the thing, and it's or like when we're running product and I know the acquisition's coming, and you have really ambitious engineers who are like, well, why don't we build this? And I'm like, let's just not do anything risky. Let's just keep the business doing well. Like there is some management there that I wish people would talk more about.
There were a few times in that process where Jerry would call me random hour and say, fuck it, let's keep building. And then he'd wake up the next day and say, nah, I can't. I got to take care of my family. And I think that exemplifies the issue, which is you saw people sign up for big visions, but then every 4 to 5 years, the market offers you something if you've built value. Mm-hmm. And for the founding team, it's really hard. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think naturally ambitious people want to, and we ran into this a little bit, like we were proud of what we built. We'd done well, but we all wanted to move on too. Like we wanted to build something else for ourselves, right? It wasn't, I mean, we wanted to be Jerry. We wanted to be the entrepreneur and do something, and so it's like, that's the other part of it is like every 5 years, like, you're like, okay, we got an offer and we can all go work on a new problem. And I think ambitious people and typically entrepreneurs are problem solvers. And once you feel like you've solved a problem, it takes a very special person to want to scale that problem, right, to the massive thing. And so I think you run into that too.
And you said something earlier tonight, which is spot on, which is one of the biggest problems with Choose is we didn't control a key portion of the acquisition funnel. It required events to drive attention to energy topics. And I think that we lost, some people didn't stay with Choose the entire 5-year journey. And it was those who just got really frustrated with the lack of control. I don't blame them.
Yeah.
And just so like, if you can't control your business or a key portion, you should move on.
Yeah.
There's enough great ideas to solve. Enough ambitious people should be solving big, ambitious problems. We solved a great problem with shoes. At one point in 2016 or 2015, we were the largest originator for rooftop solar in the U.S. I'm proud of that. Like, that's real world impact. And like we solved it. Like we solved that challenge and we moved on. And if you don't wake up and every month and say what's next, if you don't know that answer, it's time to move on. And we hit that. We hit the.
Yep.
This is good enough.
I took this note down from it was Who is Michael Ovitz, and he said, "Great companies don't move from one crisis to the next. They aren't pulled by their work; they create it." And I think that's kind of what we ran into. Choose is like you were pulled by weather events in a lot of ways. And solar, kudos, to Parker and some of the team that was there. Like we created a great lead gen business. But I never felt like we were able to create opportunities. But I'm proud of what we accomplished because I think it goes to show that if you have a good team that executes on a problem that's big enough, you can fight your way to a good exit. But it is frustrating when you're like, okay, well, there's not a weather event. Where do we spend? How do we spend? You have to we were really good about cash management, being very targeted in our spend, what we built, partnerships, those kinds of things.
I think that's, maybe this is the end of the topic, but we were acquired ultimately because it was $20 million plus revenue business, recurring revenue business that had 20% EBITDA margins coming from cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
The moment that switch flipped, the acquirers showed up.
Yeah.
And when you're being sold versus bought and you want to command a premium, having control of your destiny because you are cash flow positive is the single most thing you can do to increase your value.
That's right. Especially in a business like energy where the acquirers can't. It's not the typical tech company or startup company in most cases. They cannot acquire something or have to justify acquiring something that's not balance sheet accretive.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, they can, but your value prop better be very strong to their business. But if you look or are profitable on your own, then they can do some things and it makes more sense to them.
There's another topic to cover here, which is like people staple themselves, their personal brand, to the company they're working for. I don't know what you call it, maybe the title of that, but it's like one of the hardest parts for me, I think for you too, at Choose was, there was excellent years. Like truly incredible. 2013, 2014, 2015 was really tough. 2016 was great. But when you become assigned to a company, I was the third employee, it becomes like part of your self-worth. And
sure.
like one of the hardest, like everything, you go home for Thanksgiving, people want to know about it. Maybe they didn't want to know about it, but I just felt like they did. So I would talk about it. Go to dinner on Friday night, I would talk about it. And so the highs and the lows just like collide with your personal life. And like I would take it very hard because, and I'm very interested in energy and in the broader transition. But like there was like a time when I would just hate it. Cause like I would hate it because it was hard. Then, you get find a new challenge and get reinvigorated. But I don't think people talk enough about how like it becomes so much of your life. And that was, and so like when the exit does ultimately come, there's something very freeing if it hasn't, like again, ours was successful by most measures, not the current day where companies were public and then going multi-billion-dollar companies overnight. But every question from everybody, if you're early on in a startup, comes about the startup, and that's just, it's hard to mix and match your personal and business life to such an extent.
Yeah. I mean, even mean, man, even at the earliest stages, I entrepreneurship in general is super lonely, and it's super lonely because people ask you about it and they want you to talk about it, but they don't get it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, they want to hear the numbers.
That's right. That's right.
They want to hear what were you, what is some metric that is like, I'm not probably gonna understand, but that like it tells me that you're like, this is working for you.
Yeah. And I think I'd actually be interested to get your take on this because I think we have different family backgrounds. Like your dad's been in business, your wife's dad's been in business. My dad's been in energy. My mom's never really been in business, HR. The numbers don't mean as much to them. So like I can tell them how excited I am, but they don't understand like my mom will ask, she'll be like, doing any new investments, like you working with any new companies, but doesn't understand like the day to day of like I'm up answering emails at all hours of the night, like, that kind of thing. And if things go poorly with the company, you're stressing. And if they go great with the company, it's an awesome high. But no one really, they can ask the question, but they can't comprehend the emotions that go through what you're having. Is that different for you with your dad being in business and operating at a high level?
Yeah, the first question I ask, I do CEO updates weekly or biweekly. The CEOs jump in, they think I want to hear about the numbers, and the first question I ask all of them, I say, "Stop. How are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how is the team doing?" I don't think that was a topic when when I was growing up and my father was traveling for 3 weeks on end. I don't think his colleagues were asking that question. I don't think that most people are asking that question, or not at least maybe more than they used to, but not enough still. There like 5 years ago, I heard a line when we were still at Choose that was like, "You should work with a company assuming your options are worthless." And I laughed at the time, I'm like, hell no. We were, $100 million, and it's pretty clear that that's spot on. You got to work it's what you like and with people you like. Otherwise, the money in the end won't satisfy the delta.
Yeah, I think you were always that way, even at Choose. Like, when I would come out to San Francisco and visit and stuff, we had dinner. We talked about the business, but it was never the first part. In fact, when I first got hired and was kind of finishing my MBA, you would ask like, "What are your career goals? What do you want to accomplish? What do how can Choose help you move forward after this?" And that's just not something that most leaders ask. I don't know many people that ask that question. And
I'm going to pause you right there. We did have a bunch of dinners, rooftop drinks. Are you doing what you wanted to do?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, hold on. Are you doing it with who you wanted to do it with?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean,
and I've always felt that way, especially at Choose. I felt that way.
But I just like I that's it, man. Everything else is a lot easier if you're working with who you want to work with.
That's right.
That's it. Like, I'm fortunate with my team. You're fortunate with yours. I'm fortunate we found a way to do this. Like, once you have that aligned, stuff falls into place. And if stuff goes poorly, you have people to work through it with. And if it goes great, there's nothing better than celebrating with people you want to celebrate with.
It's after we sold Choose, Jonathan and I hung out for a month,
of course,
just drinking, having a good time, taking a vacation, whatever. But Sam Altman said something or tweeted something today that I thought was so true to your point of like, are you doing what you want to do with the people you want to do it with? And the people that say like, I work nights and weekends, and people are like, oh, well, you'll burn out, and you will burn out if you work too much, obviously. But for those people, it doesn't feel like work. Like there were many times like you and I traded Slack messages midnight, 1 o'clock. Jerry worked that late. Jonathan worked that late, but it never felt, like work. It just felt like you were trying to solve a problem with some buddies, Erica was that way. She was, working on her SEO, SEM. I still see Erica, every other time I go to San Francisco, because she's now a friend. Like I worked with somebody that like I really respected how they worked and helped us get to the end there. And I think that just, to your point, that really matters.
So we probably need to wrap this up here in a minute or two, but my final question to you would be this. You're now in the venture capital game. You are no longer operating a high growth startup. Well, Intellis could be a high growth startup, I guess. What's one lesson you want a CEO to take away from Choose?
Oh man. I don't have just one.
Well, that's what makes it hard. Choose one.
So this came up in a podcast, and I'm going to go with this because I think it reflects on how good of a leader we had. You know what Jonathan remembers most from Choose about Jerry? That he took out the trash.
Oh, they took out the trash. Yep. I was going to say that he cried when he announced to the team about the acquisition.
Yeah, he did do that too. But he took out the trash. So for those of you who don't know the story, most of you probably don't, our first office in Plano, and just a suburb of Dallas, was an old dentist office. And literally, when I say old dentist office, I mean our reception desk still had the windows.
Yeah, that is such good memory.
One restroom, Craigslist furniture, bare bones. And so in an eating area that was, I don't know, like 8x8 rooms, tiny. Anyways, trash is in there. Jerry, every week, clean the bathroom, take out the trash. And that's not a business thing, but you just see that and you go, that guy's in it with me.
Yeah.
And so that's the advice I would give to an entrepreneur is your team notices how you do everything, even if it's small, even if it's meaningless. But the message you send by doing something like taking out the trash says that we're in this together. I'm not above anyone. And I can't tell you, and I tell people this all the time. When I started at Choose, if you would have looked at it, you would have said that was an obvious career move. That's a high growth startup funded by KP.
Dallas.
Out in the Bay. You get to stay in Dallas. You get everything. I joined Choose because of Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
I sat down with Jerry. I actually taken another offer. I was done with energy. And I called Anita and I said, I think I'm going to make 30% less than what the last offer I just got on a job was, but I've got to work for that guy. And then you see it time and time again. But I just thought it was fascinating that we were recapping a podcast the other day, and Jonathan literally goes, that guy reminds me of Jerry because like he feels like he would take out the trash. I mean, and it's like I don't know, man. That's not a business lesson. I'm not saying that like Jerry was a brilliant sales guy. There was many times I sat on the phone with Jerry and watched him walk someone into the decision that he wanted them to make. Tactically, he was really good at what he did. But he took out the trash.
People remember how you make them feel, not what you did for them.
Yeah. Flipping that around, what's the first thing you tell a CEO? You're at a different stage, but what do you tell them?
So I appreciated how ultimately when we decided at Choose to proceed with an M&A process, the board, Dave Mount, Kleiner Perkins, now G2, they just said, sure, you guys know best. And I think it's very easy for board members to jump in and pretend like they're faux operators. And that was really hard for me in my first few years back at Energize. But I do respect, at least from the M&A process, how Um, you always need to trust that management knows best when to seek an exit. If they're telling you, whether body language, fatigue, telling you straight up, listen. So I think that was an important part. And I think if we had stayed longer, maybe there was a little more premium, but fatigue would have probably crushed the business.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, if your team comes to you and says, "It's time to go," I mean, a lot of does that happen? I mean, I guess that happens pretty frequently. You're like, "No, you've got to stay in."
Well, they say we'll get new management.
Yeah,
Venture wants 5 to 10 year holds. So if it's too early, then get new management.
yeah, interesting. Well, I think we spent more time on Choose than we intended to, but we shared some. I mean, good lessons.
The one person still listening will think so.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan or Jerry or whoever.
Love you, Jerry.
Yeah, whoever wants to. Happy birthday, Jerry. We
That's right.
talked about Choose for a while, but it was fun. It was a hell of a ride. But there was things we didn't get into that we'll release in the paper. We'll release in the blog post tomorrow. Anything
Until
else?
next week.
Till next week.
Time to power down.
Power down. See you, everyone.